This podcast is sponsored by Pogo, property operations on the go. Facility managers know how challenging it can be to keep everything running smoothly. That's why Pogo was created, a white-labeled software solution designed by property managers for property managers. Pogo is your ultimate all-in-one platform for managing multiple assets. With Pogo, you communicate with your tenants, manage maintenance requests, control property access, manage bookable spaces, and much more. Plus, with advanced analytics, Pogo empowers you to optimize your operations anytime, anywhere. The best part? Pogo is completely customizable to fit your brand and business. Simplify your operations, enhance tenant satisfaction, and save money with Pogo. Ready to make the switch? Visit gopogo.us to schedule your demo today. Pogo, one system, multiple solutions at your fingertips. Hello everyone, Mark Beffort here, bringing you relevant discussions with leaders in the commercial real estate community. Really proud to have Kenny Tsoodle, President and CEO of the Alliance here in Oklahoma City. Kenny, welcome.
Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kenny, we've known each other for a while since you took over the Alliance. The thing that strikes me about Oklahoma City is there are just so many really good leaders within our city that really drive where we are today. And you're one of those because you've been with the city for how many years?
Spent about 20 years with the city government, and I've been here at the Alliance for the last 3. So been kind of around this almost, over 20 years, almost 25.
and I didn't meet you till 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And you're one of the gems within the city. And it's interesting when Jim Couch stepped down from being city manager and Craig Freeman took over. I had never met Craig Freeman.
Yep.
What a great leader Craig has been for the city of Oklahoma City. He's taken over after Jim was obviously a great leader for many, many years. And I just wonder how many other people in the city that I don't know that really drive what happens on a day-to-day basis. But all that to say is I've really enjoyed getting to know you over the last 3 years, and you've done a tremendous job. And,
Thank you.
And I appreciate our partnership. So you started your career at the city, or did you do something before you were at the city?
Yeah, I did a little bit of banking and accounting and those sorts of things, and it was one of those, took a job with the city as a budget analyst and thought, this seems interesting, and then just fell in love with it and spent a lot of time in the finance department of the city.
Yeah, so I didn't realize this about you either until I got to know you. You really were behind a lot of the financial obligations and the restructuring of whatever instruments that the city uses to provide its development and or running of the city over many, many years, correct?
Yeah, so I think that's really how I got involved in economic development. Was for years I did the capital financing for the city, issuing bonds, notes, debt, and helped put together a lot of the deals that we did, like the Omni deal or financing around downtown's Project 180 and some of the TIF districts and things. And that's really how I kind of got my foot in the door on economic development.
Yeah. So, you bring up a couple of interesting projects. So, the Omni project is, to really become that next level city, you have to have convention centers, convention business, you have to have convention center hotels. And I think that what you guys orchestrated with the Omni was really kind of a next step in our direction, because we did not have a hotel that has over 600 rooms like we do now at the Omni. And so that was an interesting project. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we were building a new convention center. It was funded through the city's MAPS sales tax initiative. And, as you said, I think it was 2 things. Needed that big convention center hotel that could have big room blocks. But also, I think something a lot of people don't realize was we needed more space in the convention center. And, you have to live within your budget. So that was part of what we did was we got a bunch of extra meeting space in that hotel. So those things, as you may know, convention space doesn't make a lot of money on hotels. So that was a big part of the city's contribution. So we had to figure out, hey, how do we put $85 million in to help with this hotel without having any money to do it? And we had to go figure that out.
A lot of naysayers about as we move forward with our city, there's always going to be certain people that don't like what we're doing, but and I think there were some folks that were a little concerned about the Omni, bringing Omni in, that many new hotel rooms. But as a hoteler, because we own the Colcord and the Skirvin, we have found that it's actually been a benefit because it's bringing more convention business here, and we've had better performance at our hotels over the last couple of years than we've ever had. Now, we're coming out of through COVID and stuff like that, but I think it's been a benefit to the city. So.
Oh, there's no question. I mean, I think that's part of, we had to grow that inventory to a certain level and having a bigger convention center, and all those things are ingredients you have to have to attract those conventions. And also, I think as we become a regional and somewhat of a national tourist draw for different things, certainly a regional draw for that. It's a lot of people that come and do weekend stays and things like that. So there's just more and more to do here in Oklahoma City.
So did you get involved? I think another tremendous project that we have over at the Chickasaws have done over at Akana. And were you involved in that process at all?
Yeah, a little bit. In the city participated pretty heavily in putting a lot of tax increment financing in on that as well. Previous to that, if folks don't know the history, that whole area was just kind of blighted, and the first project was the First Americans Museum, and was very involved in that when I was over at the city, and working with the state to bring in the Chickasaw Nation to bring that and get it funded and figure out a plan on that. So that's another one of those areas I can't believe what it's become when you knew what it looked like before.
Oh my gosh! I mean, just fabulous over there, and really what's happened there. So, as we move through our evolution as a city, there becomes a lot of demand, and everyone has an idea. And to me, that's a challenge because you and I have talked about this. I'm not sure what your feeling is. I tell you what my feeling is, but you're a good listener. I want to give you that. But you hear a lot of ideas and stuff, and one of the challenges I think that we as a city have is not every deal is a good idea, or not every idea is a good idea. And how do you navigate through the complexidies of different political challenges that maybe somebody has an idea or an actual economic? How do you wade through all those?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think kind of starting with a little background of the Alliance is sort of an umbrella organization that was put together about 15 years ago, and we manage about a dozen different economic development entities. Some of those are public bodies, some are LLCs, some are 501c3s. And we have a lot of boards and a lot of business leaders and a lot of community leaders and political leaders on these different boards. So I think, some may look at that as something that's hard to manage, but I think that also gives us a good temperature, and, having that touch with kind of a wide cross-section helps us know kind of what the city and the business community and the community at large's priorities are. But kind of delving a little bit more into that, I think it is a difficult thing right now in that Oklahoma City is at the precipice of really taking off. And we've already had a lot of growth in the past 20, 25 years, but there's a lot of folks, even from the outside now, who are looking to invest, do a lot of projects. And I think that's one of the hardest things is looking at how do we pace all of this at the right way? How do we do developments that work together? How do we be inclusive and, talk to everybody, consider everybody's ideas, be fair? But I do think we have to look at strategically, how do things absorb in the market? And, we've had a long history of sort of doing big public improvements and then incentivizing the private development around those. So I think we continue on that model, and we want to work with people who deliver and who have a history of delivering, and we want to work with people who have ideas and, good ideas and make it performance-based. But I do think a lot goes into that of vetting ideas and sometimes going, that's not the best idea for this area, or that doesn't really fit in, or this doesn't work, but what about this, and it's a little bit of art versus science.
Yeah, so you mentioned one topic I think is really, really key is the connectivity. And you've heard me say, we're a city of, let's call it 1.5 million, 1.6 million population. That's in our entire MSA. And there are a lot of things happening. If you really look at what is just happened recently with the Convergence project that we did, the Okana project. You have the entire Strawberry Fields area that's trying to be developed. You have Wheeler District. You have the new stadium and what's ultimately going to happen around once the new stadium gets built for the Thunder. And then you have the new multi-purpose stadium that's being built down by the Producers Co-op area, and the entire development that's going to happen around that. You have the folks that are trying to redevelop Classen Boulevard from 13th Street down. And there's a lot of other things. How do we as a city really support all that and ensure that they're all successful and how they all meld together? That's a big challenge we have.
It is. The city's getting ready to seek some help in doing some planning, some kind of master planning to try to look at all these different areas around the downtown that are developing. And you're exactly right. It's a challenge. What other top 20 city has over 300 acres of developable property in its core?
Yeah.
I mean, and right around. And if you kind of look at it, we've got probably 5 or 6 districts that all have, 30 to 50 plus acres.
Good point.
And how do those develop? And I think connectivity, both from water, sewer, road infrastructure, people moving, transit and transportation, sidewalks, just the flow. Right now, look at Thunder games. People just sort of park all over and walk,
that's right.
And that's how we're trying to figure this out of, when there's an additional, sporting arena down here in the multi-purpose stadium, how will people move about between that, baseball, basketball, and all the other things. So these are really important things I think we're doing some formal studies on, but I think a big part of it's just our community talks to each other, private side, public side, we all talk, and we've got to keep those lines of communication open.
And I think we are special in that case because we do work very, very well together. So let's transition into tools that you have. So everyone hears about TIF, which stands for tax increment financing. Tell the audience what TIF is.
Well, basically, we have the ability to create TIF districts that we look at areas that have low or no property tax, and it can also apply to hotel tax and sales tax. And basically, if you create the district for the next 25 years, any growth from where you set the base at day one, any growth above that can be diverted into the TIF fund and used to either incentivize projects or to do public improvements, which oftentimes those public improvements are to kind of support development, enhanced development. And so it's been a wonderful tool when you think about, downtown, and I've lived here my whole life, 30 years ago, and it was pretty blighted around here. Right. There wasn't a lot going on. And, as we've been able to use TIF and build a couple things and, take the tax dollars from that and use it to incentivize other things. And it's just been kind of a snowball effect. So that's something we've placed, I think, strategically, those TIFs around not just blighted areas, but areas where the city's made public investments. And then you use it to really incentivize the private sector around those public investments.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the city would not be where it is today if it wasn't for the forethought of, promoting economic development and using TIF as a major tool to help that happen.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, so, and I hope you don't stop doing that because as playing on something you said earlier, I really believe we're on a 20-plus year run here. We have tremendous opportunity, and we can't screw it up. And so doesn't mean that we have to do every project, but we also need to be thoughtful about how we move forward. So what are some other tools that you have outside of TIF?
Well, I think that's a big one. We also have some, the voters passed some different economic development bonds that we use for a variety of project or programs, such as our strategic investment program, which is really a fancy name for just job incentives. So, the state has a Quality Jobs Act, and kind of think about it, it helps get new employers and companies to move to the state, and then the city has a version of that helps get them into Oklahoma City, and that's one. We also do, retail incentives. And, a lot of cities do retail incentives to a lot of different areas. I think Oklahoma City's more strategic with it, that we look at really major sort of destination retail, regional draw type of retail. But I think the other thing we do a lot of is acquiring sites. We both for the public side, for MAPS projects, we help acquire sites for and have funding to do that for MAPS projects or public projects, arenas, parks, convention centers. But we also have acquired sites for employment and industrial and business parks, and that's something that I think has been another tool that, being able to consolidate the land sometimes to get them into, strategic areas or pieces that are large enough to really go recruit some of these large projects.
What are some of the metrics you use to determine should you really support this particular project and stuff? So
I think so. We look at a lot of the typical economic development things I think anyone in the country looks at when you're looking at, jobs and wages, higher paying jobs. You're looking at capital investment. You're looking at growing the tax base. Of course, those are kind of where you start. But I think also we work a lot with our local Chamber of Commerce, who's really unique and a powerful force here and wonderful partner. And I think they're unique in that they're so active, such an active chamber. And they're really the tip of the spear helping us recruit. But we really look at specific industries we want to recruit, how they tie in with what we have here, how we're diversifying the economy. But the other part of this, there's the science side of that, but it's the art side. And I think it's the placemaking and the sense of place. And a lot of it is about how are we creating a place that people want to be. And I think that's really one of the big lessons I've learned from our, past leadership the past 30 years and what their vision was. And, I'm kind of the next generation who's trying to take that and run. But it's, we don't have mountains, we don't have oceans, we don't have those things here, so we've sort of built it. We built the river, we built the whitewater rafting, we built these arenas, we built the canal, we built all these quality of life things, and those are really important. And so I think part of that, we're looking at the developments and the types of folks we're trying to bring here. Do they want to be part of that community? Are they the types that want to come and invest and be here, but also providing employment and jobs and all those sorts of things?
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned all that because, we talk about how it's just the Oklahoma way and how we're great people. Every city says they're great people. Everybody says that they have a unique characteristic about who they are as people. But what you and the city have done over the last 20 to 30 years, built those places is pretty cool. And it's kind of, you build it, they'll come type of thing. Think about one of the biggest events that this city is going to be hosting here is a portion of the LA 28 Olympics. And we would not have gotten that if we had not had that Whitewater Rapids.
Yeah.
And I think one of the unique things, I think a lot of cities do this, but I think that we have, as a city, have really taken what we call those inner city visits.
Yep.
So with the chamber, you talk about the chamber, absolutely. We got a tremendous chamber, and coupled with the city, the private public partnership working together really is a testament here.
Yeah.
But I remember being on the North Carolina or Charlotte. It was a Charlotte trip.
Mm-hmm.
And they had their own little rapids, and we saw that. We said, we need one of those in Oklahoma City. We came back and we did it. We built it, and now we have the Olympics. It's crazy to me. And we had the largest softball stadium in the country.
Yeah.
And we're hosting softball in the Olympics. That's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's one of those things that we've not been afraid to look at other places and kind of go, we don't always have the best idea. Let's go find those ideas and then improve on them. So I think there are unique things we've done here, but you're right. We went and looked at Milwaukee at what they're doing with their NBA arena and
I was on that
private
trip with
development.
you.
We looked at Atlanta, what they're doing with film. We've looked at Tampa and what they're doing on their riverfronts and things like that. So our waterfront. So it's
I was on all those trips with you.
So those are things I think we all look for ideas outside and what can we bring here? What are some things that help jog, ideas to bring here?
What are some things in cities that helped you say, I don't want to do that?
Yeah. Well, I think we try to learn those lessons both ways, what to do, what not to do. I think that's part of, I think a lot of folks are focused right now on where we've grown and where we're poised to go to try to manage that we minimize the impacts of traffic. We don't overbuild where some cities have overbuilt, and not worried about all those things we talked about earlier about connectivity and all those things, and transportation. I think, we've tried to think about some of those things in our incentives that, a lot of our things are pay for performance. We try to be careful, not make mistakes where cities have given away lots of money and then, the company leaves town the next day. I'm sure you and other developers we've worked with sometimes are like, why are you beating us over the head all the time? But,
No, I hear you.
I think we do have those partnerships, but it's where we try to structure them where we all have skin in the game. We all have skin in the game, and we're working together, and we all need it to be successful. But I do think looking at kind of how other cities, some of the mistakes and things they made, and we try not to repeat those.
Sure, and I know you're not directly tied to the MAPS program, but I mean, you're all intertwined and do get involved in some things. I think one of the lessons that we did learn, I remember being on the Kansas City inner-city visit. Kansas City, we have a huge investment in Kansas City. We love Kansas City. I think they've done a tremendous job with their Power and Light district downtown. And but one of the things, they funded a good portion of that through city mechanisms, whether it's bonds. I'm not sure ultimately how they did it. We came back here and said, we're not going to do that. We're going to fund it through our own dollars, and it's got, as you said, pay as you go. So we did not leverage the city's coffers to ensure that economic development. We did it as we got those through sales tax. I think that's really one of the key things why we continue to be successful.
I agree. I think it's one of those really leveraging the business community and trying to be a partner in that and be the icing on the cake in the financial stack and not, the major portion of it. But it really, I think it just ultimately, it ends up being more successful. The private sector is more motivated, more creative, wants, and we want people to make money. I think that's the other side of that is, sometimes cities get in the mindset of, we're pinching every penny. I think no, it's we want to incentivize, do it in a reasonable way, but we want people to make money off these investments so that they reinvest in other things. So, I think that's part of that partnership.
One of the things that you've done, Kenny, that I really impressive, and maybe it started a little bit before you took over 3 years ago, but you've continued that, is really controlling large swaths of land so that you can use that for economic development. Tell us why that's important.
Well, I think, we've been talking about this as a community for probably a couple decades of just, Oklahoma City's 620 square miles, but we haven't had large sites because so much of it's been developed with, single family housing or other things. And I think, we had so many prospects that come through the pipeline that say, hey, I need 100 acres, I need 200 acres, I need 500 acres. And so that's one of those things is it did start, right before I came into this role with our first site where we bought, a little under 600 acres at the corner of I-240 and I-35. And, as I've been here, we've assembled about a 1,200 acre site and have been working on some other large sites even outside of Oklahoma City, but in, kind of the metro area.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it's been something we've looked at data in terms of the size and scope of projects where people are trying to locate either headquarters or manufacturing sites or things like that, and tried to match that up. And I think we've been proven correct because we've already landed several large projects at some of those things. There's some that are in the pipeline now that we've got our fingers crossed on, and there's ones that we're chasing. I apologize for being overdressed today, but that's why I have a meeting later today with the prospect who's in town. So it's I think it's really critical because private sector has land, and private sector has sites. Sometimes private sector can't be as patient because their profit motivations, or they've got investors or things. And I think that's where we've tried to just do some assemblage and put things together where we can also be a little bit choosy about who we're chasing and trying to make sure it's people that have good jobs and good partners and good investments. But at the end of the day, that's like the first thing is where's somebody going to go? Workforce and a site. Those are the two things you got to have before anyone even gives you a look.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's so cool and so critical to the development of a city. And some things you're doing by attracting those right jobs, because our median household income is only about $55,000. We need that to be in the $75,000
Yep.
range. Let's compete with the best cities in this country. And the things that you're doing by controlling those sites and having that as an economic development tool to attract those right jobs is really critical, and you're doing a fabulous job.
Well, I appreciate it.
Well, I
Hope
mean,
so.
because you said, as you said, there are several announcements. I think we're gonna have here pretty soon. Knock on wood.
I hope so.
Let's just hope they come together. So
We'll update the podcast later.
that's right. Well, we'll have you back after we have a few of the announcements. We'll kind
Yeah.
of talk about the structure of those
Yeah.
deals. So that's really cool. So, what effects have you seen on your office and economic development from COVID? Have there been a slowdown, or is it just elevated? I mean, from my perspective, we did have a lull, but Oklahoma City's really prospered fairly well through the COVID era.
Yeah, I think we all, pretty much every sector, saw that lull, and exactly what you said. I think we've recovered. The lingering effects, I think, were all the supply chain issues and the inflation that followed that, and that's been what I think, unfortunately. But who knows? Maybe it was a good thing as we were growing so fast. But I think there were a lot of projects that got slowed down, or maybe still happened, but had had to be value engineered or downsized a little, or things. But I think even through that, you look at all the ribbon cuttings we've had in the last 6 months,
That's right.
and those were things that were happening, on the tail end of COVID, and so we've been able to push through that. But I do think it's, that's where our incentives are important right now, because the cost side just grew faster than the revenue side, whether that's office, retail, housing, whatever it is. And so there's still a gap there in certain areas, and that's part of what we're trying to strategically look at, how we lean in and help certain projects to kind of get over the line. But I think that's been the biggest thing, just the inflationary side of the lending seems to be, higher interest rates and some of the increased costs and, coverage requirements and shorter terms and things, of course, affected too. I think we're starting to see that maybe loosen a little. You're probably a better judge of that than I am. But
we just all had to put a little more capital than we originally anticipated,
Yeah.
and the cost of that the market is just a little more expensive. So
I think it's just all those factors have piled on each other, and they've slowed a few things down. But we've been able to push through on others. So
that's cool. So so as you look at an opportunity that somebody presents to you, or that you're out there, how do you make sure that all Oklahomans have equal rights to these particular developments, and or how do you ensure that these developments are really, really inclusive to all Oklahomans? Because one of my main pushes is I want every Oklahoman to have a job. And every Oklahoman that has a job has a better job than they have today.
Yep.
And so what are some things you do in that arena?
Well, I think it starts at the top in policy, and I think our mayor and council are very thoughtful about, the policies that are created and set, and just the tone. And then, secondly, we meet with anyone and everyone. I mean, we really do, and sometimes it takes a lot of time. But, I think just we try to give access to folks, and, we try to give everybody the same shake and analysis and look at their projects. And sometimes folks are not maybe as experienced or as well capitalized, and we do a lot of just dot connecting. I think we spend a lot of time trying to connect folks. I'm thinking of one, I won't talk about him specifically, but that is kind of a newer developer in a tougher part of our town to develop in, and we've been trying to connect him to different folks who have a little more experience in capital and things. And so But, the other side of that, I think just the nature of some of the entities. So Urban Renewal's one of my entities that's under my umbrella, and I'm the executive director of that. And of course, it has kind of a terrible connotation from what its role was in the 60s. But, today it's more of a rebuilder and a developer. And we own a lot of property in some of the areas of city that were a challenge. And, trying to be intentional about, we could open a lot of those up to big development groups, but we try to be intentional about doing small development. I'm even talking like single family houses. We could go, we have probably 100 lots, and we're trying to let folks develop those 1 and 2 at a time so they learn and can figure out how to do that, as opposed to going and hiring a big, housing developer to go say, hey, build me 100 houses.
Right.
So we're taking intentional steps like that and trying to work
really
with
cool.
a lot of community partners on things like that.
So is there are there any areas that you think are underserved from a development standpoint right now that we should all be focusing on?
Oh gosh, that's a tough question.
That is a tough question, and you may not be prepared to answer that.
Yeah, I probably wasn't. I think housing as a whole is one of those things, as Oklahoma City's been growing and just trying to figure that out. We've been such a kind of a suburban style community, and we're so spread out. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Some of the urbanists may throw things at me, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. However, I do think it's good to have more downtown residents. Right. And that's an area that we've really made, I think we've crossed probably that 12,000 resident line somewhere in there. But, a city our size should probably have 25,000 people.
It should be double that. That's right. And I think there's pent-up demand for that. We just don't have the projects for it.
And I think you're right, and I think there's still that imbalance between rents and the cost to build, and that's part of what I think over time will even out, and we're trying to, incentivize where we can on that. So that's probably one of the things that's been top of mind. Of course, as the office market's gotten, tougher after COVID, but I think looking at, how can we develop some of these old office buildings into housing? How can we build new? And we do have a couple of new downtown projects that are being built for residential. And we have several kind of repurposings going on right now.
So Dick Tannenbaum has done the 100 Park Avenue and the old Bank First building and called the Harlow, and it's got 260 some units. And I think his pre-leasing is he's
doing well.
It's greater than any other project he's done out in the suburbs.
Yeah,
and he's going to do the Robinson, which is Robinson Renaissance, convert that into housing. So, in Court Plaza just recently sold, and they're going to convert that into housing. So, but I do believe that there are 3 or 4 other projects that would be an excellent housing conversion. So I look forward to that.
I do think there's also some ancillary things around that are needed. Schools, daycare, those sorts of things. And these are all things the community is working on right now. There are things that, to basically make it a broader market, affordability, of housing downtown that will spread out the ability of different folks to live downtown. I don't live in the core, but my wife and I really would love to live in the core. We have 4 teenagers going every which way right now. And those are just sort of the things, thinking about the size and scope of, how can we think about that, that sort of spreads that market out to downtown.
But you guys are addressing that. I mean, we obviously have the John Rex School, and they're looking to expand. They're trying to go to a high school. I think those are all really cool things that will continue the evolution of downtown.
Yep, absolutely.
So is there any project that you're most excited about?
Well,
and it's okay if it's not one of my projects. I clearly get that.
I'm going to kind of say 2 general areas. I think just we talked a little bit earlier about, the large sites that we've been acquiring. And I think I'm really excited about those because we're seeing so many prospects look at that. And one of those that, talking about our 1,200 acre site we have out in west part of Oklahoma City. We've not even really started marketing that, and people are already found out about it, and they're kind of beating our door down on it. So, that and our 577 industrial park down on I-240 and I-35, those 2, sites, if you look at between them, probably about 1,800 acres of,
a lot.
what we're trying to do, a lot of this manufacturing and capture some of that onshoring that's happened and some of those things.
Right.
And then I'm really excited about downtown still, as much as has happened here, just, looking at 2028. We've got the Olympics, we've got a new NBA arena, a new multi-purpose soccer stadium. They're all supposed to be happening by 2028, and all the development and planning. And while it's partly keeps me up at night, it excites me about like what's going to be here. And this city really is going to have a transformation in the next 5 years. So it's here, it's imminent still. There's all these funded projects that are going to be built, and it's going to look different in really 3 years from now, but 5 years from now, I think some of the private stuff's going to be going vertical as well. So
if you look at the projects that have just come online or that are in progress or that are planned that will happen, I mean, you're talking over $2 billion.
I was going to say a couple billion.
And then you add into the development around those projects would be another $2 to $3 billion. All within the next 3 plus or minus years. Which I think is remarkable.
It is. It really is.
I mean, I've been here for 40 years, and I've lived through the late 80s and the 90s and early 2000s when it was just, like you said earlier, it's a ghost town. And where we're going is just amazing to me. So.
Well, like I said earlier, we've done some ribbon cuttings on probably, 400 or 500 million plus projects, between Convergence, the Citizen, Okana, the new Pratt Whitney facility, some of these things. And you're right. It's just like there's so much more still queued up and ready to go.
I'm glad you mentioned the Pratt Whitney facility, because I think wrongfully some people look at the alliance, and it's good that you said you have about a dozen different entities that kind of filter through the community that a lot of people don't even aware of. They kind of think that you're just a urban core downtown promoter. That's not true.
It's really not.
Tell us a little bit about what your involvement was with Tinker and the Pratt Whitney and really everything. That is a huge opportunity as well as an economic driver for our city.
Yeah, so we've been involved for years, one of our entities, and really a couple of them. We've done a lot of the acquisitions and things around Tinker to try to, it's our largest employer in Oklahoma City, and trying to make sure we continue to help them further their mission and, we want to make them so vital and everything so vital there that they'll never be able to go away. The government will never be able to get rid of them, and we've acquired a lot of the land that we're in the process of selling to them for the expansion of the base eastward for the new B-21 bomber campus. We helped acquire property for their KC-46 years ago. We've helped acquire property for and those are things for the actual federal government, the Air Force, but we've also worked with Pratt Whitney, who's a subsidiary of Raytheon, and have worked with Boeing and Northrop Grumman and others, some of these prime defense contractors around to help them get sites, and we continue to do that. And so we also have lots of discussions about, quality of life things for the base. How can we help with bringing more food and beverage and retail to service the airmen and folks that are out there. And so we do a lot around Tinker, and we've helped them with their peaking plant, their new gate they're going to build, and all, acquire all these properties. And so we're still doing stuff with them out there. And then, we're doing our sites. We have sites out west Oklahoma City. Of course, Tinker's east. We have sites south Oklahoma City. We work a lot with the Airport Trust and recruitments and things around, Will Rogers Airport, and we're doing things regionally. We have projects that are an hour outside of Oklahoma City, but they're within our region. So we do a lot.
So I got a question for you, Kenny. Does the city have a key man policy on you? Yeah, because we need you to stay around. We need to get a key man, because if something happens to you.
Well, I tell you, I love Oklahoma City. Born and raised here, and I would think I was one of those kids who always thought I was going to leave here, and then kind of saw what was happening and stayed. And now with 4 kids, I'm very vested in making sure they have opportunities, and if they want to stay here, they could stay here. So,
well, Kenny, it's been great to have you today. Any parting comments or thoughts that you have, or you want to share with the audience?
No, well, I think I just would say, Oklahoma City is special, and it really is. It's not an unknown anymore. I think people are realizing what we have here, and so I encourage folks and investors and other people who want to visit, live, or work here to look at us and think about us and consider us. But I just think as much as we've grown, there's so much queued up and ready to go, and I think we're going to see a second transformation, these next 10, 15 years. And I'm excited to see what happens here. So,
Well, I couldn't have said it any better, and I will say that is the real op of the day. So
it is.
Thank you for the discussion, and look forward to. And I'm proud to call you a friend, a business partner, and we're always here and love what you're doing. So thank you for
appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank
I really
you.
enjoy doing it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
In our next episode, I'll be joined by Steve Lackmeyer, a seasoned journalist for the Oklahoman. Since 1990, Steve has been a pivotal voice in chronicling Oklahoma City's transformation. An author of many books on Oklahoma City's history and a 2022 inductee into the Oklahoma Journalism Hall of Fame, Steve brings unparalleled insight into the city's past, present, and future.